You good? Awesome. Let's talk about endangered species. I'm looking at them right now. Right now in the world, we have plenty of endangered species among humans themselves. Let's look at the statistics. Right now, Somalia has a 23.29% chance of genocide. Sudan, 21.93%. Afghanistan, 21.43%. Iraq, 20.59%. And Pakistan, 20.42%. This is happening right now, and not many people know about it. Genocides are occurring, and we need to stop it.
If you look through history, this has occurred in places such as the Holocaust or the Rwandan genocide, the Hutus and the Tutsis. So this has been a common theme throughout history, and the sad thing is that it's mainly caused by unawareness, especially in parts of the world where it's not occurring. Therefore, our plan is the major global powers should raise awareness and advocacy in order to of genocide, in order to decrease global genocide, starting in Somalia. And so the way we solve is we're going to solve through governments implementing awareness and advocacy opportunity programs in their countries, because the way we as Americans know about these genocides occurring in other parts of the world are largely through private organizations that raise awareness. However, if the government do it, it would be a much more widespread, it would be implemented almost through like public awareness, more people would know about it. And then also we think the major world powers, as I said in our plan, should come together to create an organization solely to combat genocide. And by having these authoritative powers put pressures on the smaller countries that are executing these injustices, it makes them much more likely to realize that they are under speculation and stop these crimes.
Now, the first point of solvency for these problems is to tell people through these through the awareness program part of this World Powers organization about the early warning signs of genocide and why it's important to look for those in other countries' statistics and attributes and behaviors. Firstly, ghettoization, moving people who shouldn't be moved into places that are usually neglected just because of, well, a cultural targeting, or even stockpiling of bodies unjustly within African countries specifically, and especially also along the lines of birth control, where people are being raped and sterilized unjustly as well. And a big way to get this awareness going so that it doesn't just disappear on the news or any other TV program such as Coney 2012 is to keep the awareness going through political action within specifically America for ourselves, obviously, but also in other countries, using the United States as a global leader for this awareness. The way that we can do this is through educational reform, making sure that the students of America are able to actually, learn how to vote and be a political actor to where they can do something as simple as email a senator of their state so that action can occur.
So just kind of an overview, our plan implements itself in three ways: the educational reform, like you just said, the increasing of advocacy opportunity programs from the government, and the creation of an organization to combat genocide between the world powers. That's pretty much it.
All right, so you said you're going to have the major powers come together and create an organization that's going to combat genocide. Why does the UN not do that? Because didn't the United Nations have to step in and send troops to combat the Rwandan genocide?
Okay, we were actually thinking that a good basis for the major powers would be a large part of the United Nations. And the problem is that they do try to combat genocide, but they don't label it as genocide prevention. And that's part of the that kind of enhances the unawareness of people within those countries, because if they had an organization that was specifically labeled to prevent genocide, it would show more initiative.
So I don't know too much about it, so that's where I don't know this, but the United Nations a couple months ago said that ISIS was committing genocide in Iraq against disease. And obviously a military intervention in Iraq is something that is extremely controversial, but it seems like maybe we would want to do. Would we all support having this group of powers militarily intervene in Iraq to stop a genocide of these.
Yes, very much. And that's where the political action comes in, where we vote and are able to tell the United States, hey, we want more action to go over into these areas that are being affected by these genocides and to actually change something and get the American people and other people of other countries specifically to, be a part of it, and so that the awareness doesn't go away or fade away like we mentioned in the speech. You can go.
So my question is a lot of these are genocide issues that are happening, or just because happens in post-colonial nations, right? Because of the borders are left behind, the infrastructure, the way in which the European great powers left. How are we sure that when these great powers return to solve the issues, they won't just make things worse? Or why are they inherently more educated about the issues happening there now when they first entered the countries?
Well, the thing about the organization and our plan is that we're implementing a lot of education and the raising of awareness, which will hopefully make the leaders of this organization prepared and able to handle it better than they did. And the thing about the genocide that occurred then was, that was before that genocide was necessarily perceived as what it is now. It was perceived as a different type of thing back then, and with this advocacy organization, that would be their sole focus. And the elected officials that could control this wouldn't be people who were racist or open to provoking genocide. They would be very aware.
Over time, we have gone to war to stop genocide and stop unjust acts, but it just keeps popping up. Are there any alternatives the UN can use?
Well, just like Ronnie just mentioned, he asked about the infrastructure that's over there and how people are going to be, susceptible to the world's greatest powers. Well, for instance, these organizations obviously are going to have coverage and the ability to help these countries out with clearance, obviously, from those governments to, build infrastructure and have that money raised from the peoples, because there will be a mass amount of people who will like to donate and help out with this organization. If we spread awareness well enough, we'll have that amount of infrastructure built over there and have enough education, awareness, and education spread in those areas to where problems that come before and after those genocides and currently during them right now will be solved. And
Who's got his hand up front?
yeah, true.
Sorry, over. I missed it.
But I actually have two questions. If you guys don't mind. Okay, so first question. You mentioned spreading awareness within the country about these acts of genocide and unjust acts. How would you exactly do that if the governments in these areas are corrupt?
Okay, well, when we were talking about the education reform, we were specifically talking about it in the United States and the other countries that had representatives in this potential organization. The countries that are currently going through genocide, those probably wouldn't have the implemented education, awareness raising programs, because genocide is occurring there. Their leaders aren't going to have them. Yeah, this is not going to happen there. We're talking about increasing awareness and advocacy opportunity, which is a big thing because a lot of people want to help but don't know how to. So advocacy opportunity would just make that a lot easier for people that are interested and devoted to get involved. But so the whole implementation thing is really here in order to increase our ability to what is the word? I am totally blanking out on the word. To get involved in the countries that are executing genocide.
And I know I said education reform could spread into those areas, but I meant after genocide is stopped and these governments get the influence of world powers helping them democratically.
Okay, and my next question was, how would the superpowers meet up exactly? Since one of the only organizations in the world that includes almost all if not all the superpowers in the world is the United Nations, which does not have the jurisdiction to actually go into wartime scenarios and actually prevent it, because they're only built for maintaining peace.
Okay. Well, we're not limiting it to the United Nations. If anything, we're talking about how the United Nations could possibly help or encourage certain countries to implement this organization. And those organizations, as I said, would have to obviously get clearance of some sort or lawful expression from the countries that would be enacted upon. in order to go and solve the problems that we're talking about, which is genocide.
One more question, one more. I know you inspired a lot of.
Have you been past like cultural barriers where like most of the history forever in the North and South America is like mistreatment and genocide of indigenous people, where it's just part of the culture to mistreat them?
That's where the raising awareness is going to come in, hopefully with the implementation of these educational programs and governmental information distribution, these people will come to realize how big of an issue it is, because right now that is kind of a cultural norm because most people are so unaware of the causes, the signs, and the effects that it has. But hopefully with this implementation we can start to reform that cultural norm.
And that's why we leave interpretation in our plan very largely, because we allow for us to say, for instance, that even a nonprofit could extend off of that organization, or say that the military could intervene. And if the military intervenes, obviously there's going to be training of some sort. There's definitely many different routes that this organization can take, but we're just the people who are trying to advocate for starting this organization, making sure that they are able to make interpretations that provide for those cultural awarenesses and implement things that aren't going to insult or go across those barriers unjustly, and are able to solve, indiscriminately, as a better word.
How do you define the non-group?
So, we can observe with substantial empirical evidence that when we educate our citizens about global issues, we often see global conflicts diminish. When it comes down to it, when we analyze the current problems the U.S. is afflicted with, we see that it is all because we don't have enough local funding for equal education. We can see that, one, educational funding distribution is unequal. People who need funding in schools that need funding in lower districts and districts that don't get enough funding, they just don't get the same level of educations that, say, higher class schools do. And that means that overall, they get a worse education. We can see that, secondly, we have poverty. And U.S. poverty causes a lower educational standard. And thirdly, we can see that racial, gender, and sexual orientational problems are evident now. And we can fix these with proper educational funding and equal educational funding. A vicious cycle of poverty is due to the lack of funding and proper educational programs. It creates a stigma between groups of economic classes. Worse economic situations can lead to increased crime and overall injustice. If we educate our citizens, we will see all of these diminish. If teachers can see that the school is well funded, that can subconsciously create the idea that their students are valuable. Low-funded schools can lead to teachers believing that their students are not valuable, therefore decreasing the opportunities and they're retaining the information. This is all because we do not have funding. We need funding. We need equal funding for all schools. We have this problem and it needs to be fixed. Without it, these are the following problems. 1, we will see an increase in poverty. We will continue to see crime, and everyone has an obligation to equality. It promotes a better standard for living and economic growth. 2, we will continue to see a class system. We will continue to see an unequal perception of individual groups. We will see that the higher class put themselves higher, essentially, than lower educated groups. And essentially, this is unequal and this is unjust because we are not giving the lower groups an opportunity for them to make themselves better. Rights. We also see a problem with rights. We have an ethical obligation to affirm what achieves and preserves rights. We see slower technological development, we see less informed public, and this equals less liberty for those who are uneducated. The United States government should pass a legislation that all states will redistribute taxes per a student basis to better public school education. This will essentially solve it by pooling money and abolishing the district system. By redistributing taxes through every student, each student will have the same amount of resources they will have the same amount of resources and opportunities to succeed. This creates no disparity between income and the school systems. It gives everyone an opportunity to do the best they can. Eventually, this plan could help solve certain issues of conflict. We will see racism decrease, we will see gender issues decrease, and we will see bias towards sexuality decrease because overall, we will have a better education of these topics. And it would also decrease poverty because those who are living in stricken conditions can get the education that they need, and that is what is important. Counties that don't have any money coming to the school create a lack of security and control. This also contributes to many problems stated before. With all the schools the same, these issues will not only be avoided, but they will be completely resolved within a substantial amount of time. You guys can
Ronnie.
Yay. All right. So, in a lot of states, or southern states, a lot of times we see that there's a lack of care for providing education funding for the state, like with the state distributing taxes between different services. So, if the funding for the entire state is low, how does redistributing that low funding between counties ensure like better education for the students? Would they just still be getting a worse education because the state as a whole doesn't have to, or doesn't give enough tax money to education?
Well, sometimes you might see bias even within that, in and of itself, because if there is more money in specific schools, that could be the reason why you'll see a lot, while there'll be more strict conditions in some schools. But pulling the money together would at least be able to bring a better standard to all the education in the state, even if it's lacking some funding.
Edward.
Yeah,
Edward, yeah, you. Edward.
Why are all of US's problems related to educational funding? Why does poverty constitute educational standards? How does education fit certain economic problems? And why do worse economic situations continue?
Can you repeat that louder?
Whoa.
One question at a time.
And louder.
So why are all of US's problems related to educational funding?
All of the US's problems are related to educational funding because if you don't have an education, you can't have educated people, which you need to run a society. I mean, every aspect of our society is based off of people, and if people don't have an education, I mean, how are they going to learn how to run the society? So that's why.
You're out here. I want to think.
We already did.
Can you explain the current system of localized funding in, like, contrast to the post-plan world?
So essentially we locked certain schools into lower funding because of the fact that the original set of students that were in that school for several amount of years weren't able to get the allocated funds that they necessarily needed because of lower education levels, but that's locked them into this because they aren't able to get resources in comparison to the schools who originally did better, because funding now is a lot of it is based on like how people do on standardized testing and how they how successful they are academically, and then like with the extracurricular activities too.
In addition to that, there's also generally part of the school's funding is based on a property tax. So wealthier areas of town, you raise a higher gross revenue in places with wealthier estates and therefore wealthier people. So poorer districts lose that net gain of money because they just don't have individuals in their district capable of paying the same amount in property taxes to that district.
You talk about wealthy districts in your way of like reallocating money. What is preventing from wealthier districts of like parents to just donate more to the school, even if there's a like equal educational funding spread throughout the state, to create these better schools and still leave the other ones not able to compete?
I can think that one reason would be that education is sufficient in their area and not all of them find it necessary. But if they're giving funds and it's being redistributed with their knowledge that it would be used for a better standard of education, I feel like that would be a better way to solve the issues.
And we're not saying we can necessarily make it equal across the board. We're just stating that we want to make it to where more funds can be allocated to those schools that are lacking resources so that they can at least have increased education opportunities. While we can't stop people from donating to their schools, it at least increases overall education opportunities for other people.
Argument.
Okay, so you said that education versus poverty, but you didn't say how, and you said that.
Wait, what was your question?
How does education improve?
How does education relate to poverty?
Well, essentially, if you have an education, then you have a means for yourself to not only get a job, not only to care for yourself, but you know how to allocate money you earn, and you know how to allocate your resources into making better opportunities for yourself. And this means that those who get education, they also essentially help the newer generation, because if you have a generation that is educated, it helps the other generation. So it will increase poverty. I mean, it will decrease poverty. I'm so sorry.
Nobody call Shannon. Shannon, no.
So you talk about like making sure that resources are distributed, and it's based on, you're saying now it's based on the current system of taxes, correct? And you want to reform that how?
By pooling all the money together and then making it equally allocated between schools.
And how will you, my question is thinking of more of like, how will you evaluate, or what will be the enforcement mechanisms to ensure that the money is allocated evenly among schools? And I ask this because Prince George's County, Maryland has a high amount of, I guess the median income is high, but the population tends to be people of color, and compared to other suburban school systems that make the same money, they still do not have the same resources. So it doesn't seem with them to be money is the issue, and it seems to be other issues preventing those resources. So I just want to make sure how we are going to evaluate the resources being allocated equally among schools.
I think our plan is that the state government would pull in the money, and as they pull in the money, it would be based on person per school. So like, as like a person basis. So like everybody is trying to get like the equal amount of stuff. Like even if they are given money from the school, like from a parent, like we can't really change that. But if we're trying to make the system, if we were to implement the plan, it would be a system to where all students across the board would get the same amount of resources so that they'll have the same amount of opportunities as everybody else.
Our goal is equal education, so any donor funding we can't really control. Our goal is to manage like state funding for each school based on what the need is.